Hello, Canadian teen book lovers, and welcome to the second week of my marathon of books. This week, I ended up spending the whole week again in Newfoundland because some more books popped up that I just had to put on the list. My favorites this week are, starting with honorable mentions, Anne and Seamus. I hope that's right. I apologize if it's not. This is an historical fiction with elements of nonfiction book by Kevin Major, and it's actually based on a true story about a shipwreck in the 1800s where Newfoundlanders Anne Harvey and her father actually saved over 160 people from this one shipwreck. The story Kevin Major tells kind of opens up the background on Anne's family and suggests that there may have been a romance between her and one of the people rescued in the shipwreck. And it's beautifully illustrated by David Blackwood, and it's just a good read. It's also written in free verse poetry. Next up is Creeps by Darren Hines, and Darren Hines is very good at connecting people with his characters, even if you don't agree with them. So, it's a difficult story to read. It's set in Labrador, and it's about a teen boy who's a little different and bullied as a result, and also about another girl in town who's also different and bullied too. So when the two strike up a friendship, the bully that has been bullying them both gets angry and tries to get revenge. It's a harrowing read at times, but it's also an enjoyable one ultimately. My favorites this week are Nix -1, which I read on the last day of the week, and it's also a free verse poetry book about a 15-year-old guy named Nix Humboldt who has a skill for carpentry and a sister who's a little bit out of control. So the story is about how he progresses from being pretty shy and introverted to having more confidence in himself and making new friends and getting over his crush on the unattainable girl, and also about how he interacts with his sister and how the choices his sister makes impacts his whole family. Again, it's a serious, at times also harrowing read, but the free verse poetry is lyrical, and some of Joe McLean's phrasing is just, you just have to read it for yourself to experience the beauty of it. My favorite this week is An Earthly Night by Janet McNaughton, and I loved it because I remember writing on Tumblr, it was the grayest day outside and it was raining and it was just miserable, and I opened the book and I started reading, and it was just, I was transported back into the time of Jenny, which is, yes, 1162. I would not have remembered that on my own. But it's set during the feudal system, and it's I was pleasantly surprised by the complete picture I got of that time. It was a very interesting read in terms of learning about how limited the choices of women were at that time and how they were treated like property and not allowed to have autonomy. But in the midst of that, there's Jenny, who is a lady and is supposed to marry the king's brother, but decides to take a different route. It's also beautifully written. It's hard to describe, but it was just such a vivid picture of that time that when I was done, I was actually surprised that I was still in my bedroom and it was still a gray day outside. My reluctant read of the week is Refuge Cove by Leslie Joyce, and if you've been following me on Twitter or Tumblr, I think more than once I misspelled it as Refugee Cove, but it is Refuge Cove. Both names would work for this book, but it's Refuge Cove. It's about, It's about a guy who moves to what I thought was Labrador with his mother after his father dies, because his parents always wanted to live there, but they didn't get a chance until after the father had died. And they're both feeling a lot of grief over their loss. And one day, Greg. One day Greg goes out in his laser sailboat and finds a boat with 3 refugees on it, and he takes them into his home with his mother, and it's all about how they welcome them into the country and how they get past immigration. So it moves pretty quickly. It's an interesting read. That's why it's my reluctant read of the week. Are you gonna cut these things?
No.
This past week I was invited to go to a literacy event at Chapters Waterloo involving the Norwell District Secondary School from Palmerston. And they were there to pick out a whole bunch of books for their library to develop their library collection. So they had a list of books that they needed to get, but then they were also allowed to pick out books that they just thought would be good and wanted to read. And I was invited, as well as Heather T. Smith, author of Bay Girl, and Andrew Kipp, who is the self-published author of, I think it's called Darkness Falls. And we were all involved in helping the students pick out books for their new collection. It was very exciting. And then afterwards we had a panel discussion about books and the writing process, and it was a fun time. I was most surprised when the students of Norwell presented me with a donation of $120 for my marathon of books, and I just want to say thank you again for inviting me and for being so thoughtful in taking the time to raise that money for this valuable goal. So I forgot to do this last week, but I thought I would share my reading stats just so you get a sense of how the numbers are adding up. I'm now at 14 books out of 365. I've read a total of 2,910 pages. And if we're going by my calculations of 10 pages being equal to 1 kilometer, then I have traveled 291 kilometers total. Also, if you accumulate all the hours of reading, it adds up to 34 hours and 52 minutes, which means I've spent over a whole day of my new year reading books, which to me is pretty awesome, but I can understand if that seems crazy. Next week, I have one more book in Newfoundland, and then I'm on to Nova Scotia. I think there are 5 books in Cape Breton Island, and then the rest are mainland Nova Scotia. So I look forward to talking about them next time. Bye!